Hi, everybody. Welcome to the travel guide for traveling with PPS. This is going to be the first of a video series that's going to talk about how to travel with PPS. This video is going to focus on our pre-travel authorization form, but it's just one of three parts to traveling with PPS. One is submitting the pre-travel form. The second is actually booking your trip after you've been approved. And the third is a bit of paperwork that you have to do once you've actually attended your conference or gone on your training. So let's dive into this pre-travel authorization form because it's really the start of any PPS trip. And so you got to start it nice and early. You'll hear me say that a lot. We'll talk about the timelines a little more later on. But what's the point of this form? The point of the form is to lay out all of the costs for taking a trip. Sometimes that involves just driving down to Bend to attend something like the Oregon CTE conference, where the travel costs will be a little more straightforward. Sometimes you're going to a conference and it involves airfare and hotels and things like that. All of those costs are going to get laid out on the pre-training or the pre-travel authorization form. So it's really clear that we have the money to cover said trip, everybody's on board, and then we can move forward. So let's take a look at the form. Okay, so this is what the form starts out like. It's available on the PPS Travel website, but I'll have it linked below in the description and on the CTE Canvas site in the section on travel. So you can see that there's 4 sections. One's just your information. The second is what you're going to do. The third has to do with all the costs. And the fourth is all of the signatures. So instead of walking through each thing in sort of a blank, I'll show you one that I filled out. Some of my information changed. So let's zoom in so you can take a look at the things we filled out. So in this case, the employee information is fairly straightforward. Some things that are really important to make sure you have: your name, but also your employee ID number. Just make sure you have that on there. Some of our employee ID numbers have a leading 0. Make sure to include the leading 0 if you happen to have one. And then make sure you put your building name. This is very important that you put your PPS email down there, because that's going to be where you're going to hear from Travel Desk, particularly when you hear it's about approved or not. Cool. So now we will move forward and look at section 2. So in this case, this is one that I used for recent training to go get trained on Pro Tools. So you can say that the name of the conference or what I'm doing is Pro Tools training, but sometimes the organization that's putting it on, this is like the group that's putting it on. So, something called Pro Media Training was the group that put it on. Other conferences I've gone to, I might say that I'm, going to a teacher summit, but hey, that might be being put on by code.org. So sometimes those aren't the same. Anyways, then you put down the city that you're going to be in. This is really important because this dictates your per diem. So you really want to make sure that you get the city correctly. You want to put down the dates of the seminar. Now, then you also put down when you're actually going to leave and when you're actually going to return. So for this trip, our conference or training started early in the morning on the 10th. So I knew that I needed to fly out on the 9th. So I had to add that to my costs in terms of, planning when I was going to fly out, and I needed one more night of hotel. I had the return being on the 13th. Now, this was actually ended up being a mistake on my part because I flew out on the 13th and I had to miss a little bit of the training because the training went late in the day, and my flight was a little earlier than the end of the day. So in retrospect, I probably should have left on the 14th and flown back in the morning. But something to think about when you're doing this. And then give a good reason about why you're attending. In this case, I was attending a training for Pro Tools, which is related to the audio engineering CTE courses. And that makes it really clear that there's like a clear purpose for this. Okay, cost of the conference. Now we get into the number 3 section. And this is where we want to be pretty mindful about the things. So registration fees were really straightforward. This cost $2,000 to go to. And, most conferences are pretty straightforward in this regard. However, sometimes you'll see like early bird registration. You'll see, there might be like 3 different registration windows for like a big conference. And you can save money if you go register early. This is another reason to get this form turned in early, because the sooner it's approved, the more likely it is you can get that registration fee. So, pay attention to that. Pick the registration fee that makes sense for when you're actually going to be able to buy the thing, and then fill it out. Some conferences will have materials and books. This one didn't. It was included in the registration fee cost, but you might have a textbook to purchase, or you need supplies to participate in a certain training. Airfare is probably the trickiest one. So in terms of finding the airfare, you should go and just Google it. Go use one of the traveling websites. Don't try to get a crazy, super secret deal on the airfare for the pre-travel authorization for it. This is really seeing like, well, what is it basically baseline going to cost to get me down to my event? So you want to find a fair price, but you don't want to pick something that's not likely going to be there when you actually go to buy the tickets. And airfare prices change quite a lot. This is another reason to get this done early, is that in the time that I budgeted the $450 to fly down to Los Angeles, this one got filled out kind of on short notice. And so this price went up to closer to $650. Another tip that I would say is to go through the checkout process, go all the way to like the just before you pay, so you can see if there's like taxes or fees or additional cost. Also, nowadays you have to book both ways on your airfare. So make sure, like if you go to the Alaska site, that you have a down and a back, that you don't accidentally just book a one-way ticket. Similarly, baggage, if you're going to check a bag, it's often $50 per direction to check a bag. So in this case, I wasn't sure if I was going to check a bag or not, so I budgeted $100, $50 down, $50 back. Car rental, I didn't rent a car. In general, I tend to focus on the shuttle taxi as the way to get around in most cities. And in general, car rentals a little frowned upon. It's very, very expensive. And so I would say only do that if there's like it's necessary to like do the stuff you're going to do at the training. If it's a very remote location, for instance, something like that. Gas and mileage are usually very applicable when you're driving to a conference. Sometimes you're not like gonna fly. It's in Oregon. You're gonna take a trip down there. It's like this is mostly about your driving and the conference fees and the hotel, for instance. So make sure that you use current gas prices and estimate of the mileage of your car to put that down. And then this mileage refers to, we actually get a reimbursement specifically for how many miles that we drive on a work trip. And that's like a little table that you can find on the travel site, which I'll link to. In those places, I'll put all these forms. Similar parking, if you're going to have your own vehicle, that's something to consider. Shuttle and taxi. This is, really to think about how you're going to get around. So personally, I usually expect it to be $40 or $50 to get from the airport to the hotel if it's not a place that has good public transportation. And then, so in this case, the shuttle taxi, I got a subway pass for a week while I was, or a train pass for a week while I was in San Francisco, so I could use that. This was Los Angeles. This was for taking cab rides to get to the training because our hotel wasn't close to our training. It was, the 5-mile drive. Hotels. This right here is another one, kind of like the airplanes. It's not usually as volatile, but again, think about all the days that you're going to stay. price it out, use a website, take a screenshot. It can vary pretty wildly from place to place, city to city. Sometimes this is the most expensive thing. Sometimes this is cheaper than the airfare. Really depends. In general, staying at a hotel or motel is preferable. I think that there's a way to do something like a Airbnb or whatever, but in general, hotel motel is vastly easier for a variety of reasons, and that has to do with what happens after you do your approval and booking, which we'll hit on next time. And then finally, you got the meals or per diem. So that is actually, there's a formula. So again, if you go to that travel website, there's a little link that it says, tell me which town you're going to, and I'll tell you how much money you get per day. So going to Los Angeles, you get $75 per day. That actually is another reason that the departure date and the return date and the time is actually pretty important, because if you're, let's say, flying out on a Sunday morning, then you have a whole day of per diem. Whereas if you arrive at nighttime, you wouldn't get a full day of that. And then it just sums it up. And then, boom, here's the signatures. Very, very important. Don't forget your signatures. Get your signatures, submit them. Last thing, you can request an advance on the travel. I've never done this, but I think this is how you can do this too. For instance, like if you had materials that you wanted to study up on for your conference ahead of time, you might be able to do that. And then, do you want to pay district to pay registration? So I didn't check these boxes for this one because it had already been handled by Anne, and that's often how it is. So once this form gets submitted, then Anne will handle your registration. Okay, that is a filled out form and what it looks like. And now let's go on to a couple of tips that I've mentioned. Again, take screenshots of all your hotel, airline, conference pricing to back up your estimates. This doesn't mean that you're going to be guaranteed to get those flights. That'll happen when you actually do the booking. But sometimes people are curious, like, oh, hey, what was the cost of such and such a thing? Or why did you put this down? You can be like, hey, here's what I saw for plane flights. Yeah, it's really expensive to fly right now. Doing it early. So now, when you submit your Perkins and Pathways budgets, we're asking to have this form be submitted alongside of it. And that's really to help us with a lot of the back and forth. A lot of people that have gone to conferences, especially on short notice or forgot about it, there can be a lot of back and forth with this. If you're doing it sort of late and in a rush. So by having it ahead of time with all the signatures of it, then once we get the money released, we can just immediately send it out to the travel desk and get you the acknowledgments forward, which will be really good. And plus, the earlier you do it, the more likely you are to get the airfare prices that you're hoping to do. Okay, so thanks. And next time, we're going to talk about the actual booking and what to do next time on your trip. Hope this was helpful. Cheers.